No, this is interesting. Rate the degree to which you believe that your sacred experience showed you something absolutely true and was not just an illusion. 100% rated this strong or absolutely true.
There's evidence that psychedelics make people more suggestible, and you can kind of leverage them to having an overconfidence. And there's some cognitive data consistent with this. Like, is it a good or a bad thing that they're kind of more confident in an absolute truth?
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Illusion of Consensus podcast. I'm Rav Arora, independent journalist and podcaster based in Vancouver. And I'm here today with a good friend of the show, Dr. Matt Johnson, who is a professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins and is known to be a pioneer in the scientific research of psychedelic therapy. Matt has been involved in a number of studies looking at psilocybin assisted therapy for depression, end-of-life anxiety, smoking addiction, and more. I consider Matt to be one of the most sensible, grounded thinkers in the space because he does not engage in either psychedelic sensationalism of exaggerating effects or of denialism, the kind of old school traditional psychiatric approaches. I think he's very open-minded and willing to look at new evidence. So, Matt, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Av.
Yeah. So today we're talking about this one really interesting study on administering 2 psilocybin sessions to religious professionals. This was a study done at Johns Hopkins that you were a part of. And this has been talked about for a long time. I first heard about it when Roland Griffiths was on Jordan Peterson's podcast a few years ago, I think 2021. And he mentioned it towards the end that study was going to be published at some point. It seems like the study was published far later than what was anticipated. And it appears Roland was trying very hard to get it published before he sadly passed away a couple years ago now. And it was released a few months ago now, and there's a lot of hype around it, a lot of interest around it. Michael Pollan wrote a piece in the New Yorker about it, and there have also been some very serious concerns about it, which you would like to talk about, Matt. But I'll just say, first of all, I was very interested in this because I, in college, have done religious studies looking at Christianity and Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam as well. And so a study, first of all, this is just really bizarre and kind of crazy that a study like this would even be allowed. It's very unconventional and unorthodox to do something like this. But it's a very interesting area. And something that should be looked at, in my opinion, for a number of reasons. I mean, one just being how these subjective, transcendent, altered consciousness experiences shape people's religious beliefs, their priors with respect to afterlife and theological debates, their various religious views, and how it shapes their view of other religions as well, which was part of the interview process in the study after the psilocybin sessions. The religious professionals were asked that question among a lot of other questions. And yeah, just how these subjective psychedelic experiences, which are often very mystical in nature, how they impact one's religious worldview, I think is very interesting because oftentimes you read a lot of things in religious texts and you have a certain kind of linear understanding, or some people do report having spiritual or mystical experience outside of psychedelics, they experiencing Jesus or Buddha or Shiva or whatever through meditation or prayer, or through just suddenly just emerged in their consciousness. They had some kind of spontaneous mystical experience. That's all very interesting and noteworthy. But it is worth investigating how having this pharmacologically induced mystical experience, what kind of effect that would have on one's understanding of religion, whether one has had a spiritual or mystical experience before, or sometimes not. And I would say there are some differences between what often people characterize as a spontaneous mystical experience or one through prayer or meditation versus psychedelic. Often the psychedelic one can be quite shocking or jarring or just completely different from ordinary waking life. And so, how does that one impact? How does that impact one's rational potentially understanding of religious texts and the stories within them? I think is a really interesting conversation. So just wanted to lay that out about why I'm so interested in this study.
Yeah, and it's really the study has threads from well, a number of different threads. One, it's really a continuation of or a progression of earlier work we had done with spiritually and religiously interested individuals, showing high rates of mystical or spiritual experience, strong attributions of positive effects on people's lives, high ratings of personal meaningfulness and spiritual significance. Um, and that work itself was an extension of the 1962 Good Friday study with psilocybin that Walter Pankey conducted in seminary students. And so, in a sense, this study kind of has both inspirations. It harkens back to the Good Friday study in that it's tapping into religious professionals. Those were students to be clergy, seminary students in that 1962 study. Here they were established clergy across a number of faiths. Um, but yeah, all of the questions that in terms of like the spiritual implications and the attributions people make. It's an interesting extension to say, well, what do religious professionals think of that type of experience and what effects does it have on their life?
Can you briefly describe the intention of the study and what the goal is, what the objective is, and then start laying out? We can pull up the study here too. Just how many people were in the study, how many of different religious faiths, and just the design of the study briefly, and then we'll talk about what actually happened.
Sure. Yeah. So the goal of the study, um, there were multiple goals of the study, unlike a therapeutic study where there's typically a singular, primary outcome. There were a number of sort of top level areas of interest here. It was a very exploratory study. Generally, it's like characterize the experience that people have, that these religious professionals have on a high dose of psilocybin, um, and then assess the psychological impact, including their attribution of whether it was a helpful or a harmful experience, and both personally and in terms of their professional life.
Mm. So can you briefly run through the design of the study?
Yeah. So there were 29 religious professionals across several different religions. They were randomized into one of two groups. One was an immediate group that got two psilocybin sessions relatively immediately after several weeks of preparation, and then the two sessions were 1 month apart. And it was a moderate and then a high dose of psilocybin, so 20 milligrams per 70 kilograms of body weight, and then moving up to 30 milligrams per 70 kilograms of body weight. Um, Although we were allowed to keep it at the moderate, and some people did, but the general default was to go start with a relatively high, like a moderate dose, and then move up to a very high dose. Um, and So that was the immediate group. So these sessions 1 month apart, and then the wait list group was randomized to just wait for 6 months before undergoing that treatment. And so assessments were taken at about 6 months before that crossover. In other words, before the delayed group received their treatment. So you can look at the long-term impact of, or it depends on what you consider long-term, but the 6 months later impact of having gone through those sessions or not. And then after that, then the delayed group has their assessment, and then a year after that, or longer, the assessments are made again. And so on average, I think that was like 16 months later. So that's, you have this very long term kind of point of impact after both groups have received the treatment. But the primary comparison was between the two groups at that 6 month time point, between the group that hadn't received it yet and the group that had. And by it, I mean the 2 psilocybin sessions. And so that's the basic design. I will say it's not the best design. It's a known limitation to have a waitlist control design, because essentially in at least therapeutic studies with addiction, it's generally known that your control group actually does worse than they would have had they not entered the study at all. Because, they're kind of teased to like do something and then are told to just basically not change anything. And so, for example, in a drinking, an alcoholism study, they would have made greater improvement had they not even entered the study, compared to when they enter the study and are just told to wait for 6 months. So I wasn't a fan of that. I was vetoed on that, in terms of performing it like that. It's sort of it kind of stacks the cards in your favor in terms of having you can call it a randomized design, but honestly, in my view, it doesn't really provide anything experimentally more rigorous than just an open label. And this was open label. In other words, there was no blinding. There was no placebo involved, but it really doesn't provide anything beyond what an open label study would provide you.
Gotcha.
But there's some value in it, and certainly, and it's largely a descriptive study, so we know what the people reported 6 months later. But I
Yeah.
wouldn't put a whole lot of weight on the, like, say, the difference between the two groups.
Yeah. And what were the different religious groups that were represented?
So 22 Christians, and there was variation. Of course, Christian is a broad category, but let's see, 4 Episcopalians, 4 Presbyterian, 3 United Methodist, 2 Lutherans, and 2 United Church of Christ, 1 Congregational, and 1 Baptist. During the writing of the manuscript, I said, "What type of Baptist?" because there's so many, but uh, the co-author didn't think it was worth providing detail on that anyway. And 1 Eastern Orthodox, and 1 Pentecostal, 1 Reformed Church of America, 1 Roman Catholic, and 1 UU, Unitarian Universalist. And then there were 5 Jewish folks, so rabbis. So 3 Orthodox, 1 Reconstructionist, 1 Renewal, and then 1 Sunni Muslim imam, and then 1 Zen Buddhist.
And Matt, you and I were at the Denver psychedelic conference, which was incredible. And there was a presentation on this study by your co-author. I forget his name.
Steve Ross, yeah.
Steve Ross. And he highlighted, which I found actually very surprising, that you could not find a single Hindu priest to be in the study.
Yeah. And there was 1 Hindu that had qualified, but then one of the it was actually a funder, as I recall, that who was also working on the study. When it kind of got to them, they had opinions that form of Hinduism didn't count. So there was this sense that the people in the different categories needed to be relatively mainstream. And so, any of these categories, you could find somebody that considers themselves this or that, but then other members of that larger religion would say, well, no, they're not a real, whatever, you name it.
Yeah.
So anyway, that person was then, we ended up not going forward with that person who I self-identified as a Hindu, because it was thought that they were part of some sort of
Yeah.
strange sect on the
Yeah.
opinion of the funder.
Right. And I say, by the way, that it's surprising because, yeah, in my reading of the different religions, to take that as you will, uh, Hinduism is much more open and more broad in its religious views. Like it's commonly known that uh, a Hindu will happily accept Jesus into their religious understanding, or like go to like a Christian event or a church or cathedral, but the other way around is less likely. That's often been common
Right.
reported for a Christian to go to a Hindu festival. Hinduism naturally, because of its um, sort of pantheistic elements and sort of
Right.
viewing God being kind of everywhere within everything, and God being that you can access God through different pathways. That's part of, because Hinduism is actually not even a single religion. It's more of a Western concept of a broad range of religious ideas within India. And so Hinduism is really more like 400 religions. It's just a made up number, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a lot of different religions that have some commonalities, but some differences. Some view that like everyone carries the essence of God. Others say that no, there's only one God and that we're all separate from it. Others say that like our true, like the we're the drop in the ocean in terms of God. Others say it's more like a puzzle piece in a puzzle type. There's all kinds of different varieties of Hinduism, and they're typically more open and more sort of diverse in their views. And so that it's a little more surprising that you could readily find more Christians, but obviously there's more Christians in the United States than Hindus, so there's a population difference as well.
Yeah. What is it? Something like 1% of the U.S. population is Hindu. Um,
Yeah, something like that.
I'm not sure, but it's got to be somewhere in that order of magnitude.
Yeah,
It's not double digits for sure. Nowhere
yeah,
close.
yeah.
So
It's
yeah,
one
and there
percent.
were efforts, but you know, recruitment is usually a real challenge for. And I'll say it probably more so than even your typical psychedelic study, where recruitment is really a challenge. It was particularly a challenge here, which I really made a strong point about this in the paper. I wanted to really emphasize that, hey, I mean, it was me that introduced in terms of the limitations. Like, hey, this isn't a representative sample. Like, we can't assume that the results we get from these people is representative of clergy in the United States. I mean, because the vast majority of clergy members would say, no, I'm not going to participate in a study that's using a psychedelic as a sacrament. So we just have to keep that in mind. But that makes it a real challenge to recruit for these studies. I remember at that same, a funny thing is that you might think, well, wow, we had, 5 in the Judaism category, and one thing to correct earlier or to clarify earlier, that it was done at Johns Hopkins and New York University, which was
Yeah,
kind of like not really appropriate. We designed it, and this again, there were lots of things about this study that I recommended against, but ultimately I wasn't the scientist in charge, the principal investigator, so to speak. But it was conceptualized as a multi-site study, like a single study that was done at 2 different sites, but it was submitted to the IRBs separately, as if they were just 2 completely independent studies, and they were combined at the end, as if, I don't know, both universities just kind of randomly ran the identical study and then decided to publish it together. So that's not really the right thing to do. And there were some downsides that we could talk later about, some of the problems with the study. There were some downsides to doing that, but basically the study was run at New York University, which is in Manhattan, of course. And you might think, well, how can you get only 5 Jews? Like, especially considering that the Jewish population of New York City. And I will say, now that I think of it, next to Israel and then New York City, Baltimore, I believe, is the third biggest the Baltimore general area is the third biggest Jewish population on the planet. So really for both sides, but particularly New York, given its size. But it sounds like a joke, but the rabbis willing to do this study, basically, virtually all of them had already used psychedelics. So it was really common to find really progressive rabbis who were interested, but who had experience with psychedelics, which disqualified them.
Yeah. Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. And so let's talk about what happened in these sessions. So to be clear, you were not there for those sessions. Is that right?
Yeah, I wasn't in the room in any of these sessions, but I was. Yeah, I mean, I was across the hallway when
Right.
the sessions were running. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And at
and
some
I
point
met
we're
with you know, uh, you know, uh, a number of the participants and whatnot.
gotcha. Yeah, and at some point, by the way, you and I are going to do a podcast about some of your early work at Hopkins for the psilocybin therapy for end of life distress and depression and smoking addiction. And so you actually guided those sessions, which I find very fascinating. So you've guided psychedelics
Yeah,
too.
I've guided a bunch of sessions, like over 100 psychedelic sessions. I stopped counting at some point,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah,
We'll do a podcast at some point because I find that so interesting, and having done it myself, I've not guided it, but having done it, and like the role of the guide is just so powerful because you're at your
yeah.
most vulnerable moment in life. Really, everything's just opening up, and the deepest, darkest issues are emerging. Um, so, and one thing I want to know too, from the psychedelic conference, the presentation on the study, I met one of the Christian priests who was in the study, and to your earlier point about the bias going into this, I asked him, and his wife was there too. Like, did you have any bias toward for psychedelics beforehand? And he just said like, not really. I was just open to it. I'd heard some good things about it, but I had no real idea of how it would impact my religious views or my faith. And then his wife also backed him up and said that like he's a very straight laced guy. He didn't start drinking until they got married or something like that. And he's not a drug user, and so he was very open minded and didn't really have any strong like psychedelics are going to amplify my faith or anything like that. So I did find that kind of noteworthy because I would have expected and maybe this is true for some of the other participants that they might have a more pro psychedelic bias going into this, that it would have a positive impact on their faith, which is obviously a concern when you're doing a
Right,
study
and
like this.
there's going to be variation, but my thinking is probably the difference from the participants, like your sort of average US clergy member, is not that these people were particularly pro psychedelic, but that they were at least kind of more neutral in terms of being willing to do it. So maybe the people on average doing the study were kind of, as you described, more open to doing it and kind of at least neutral about it. And the larger religious clergy population is probably quite on the negative side, like, no, I wouldn't do that, that's not a religious experience. That they probably range from saying that's sacrilegious to that's you know experiences but we the work of Satan to that's just completely ridiculous and a waste of everyone's time. That would be my best guess. So it's probably not that. There might have been some super enthusiastic people, but I would probably say what you described probably characterizes most of the folks, like an openness, but it's not like they were gung-ho
Yeah,
and big fans of psychedelics. But
yeah,
just being willing to do it suggests they're different than your typical clergy member.
right, right. Yeah, and before we get into what happened, I was explaining earlier why I'm interested in this. Another reason why, and I think some of the people involved in running the study expressed this too, having an interest in exploring, is there a common core or something universal to these religious faiths, like subjectively, like in theory, like the Muslim individual, the Buddhist, the Jewish, and Christian, could they all have some similar experiences of the transcendent, that would transcend their own individual religious ideologies? Like if they all experienced God or some spiritual entity that's about unconditional love and oneness and openness and bliss, and they all, or some of them, experience that. What does that say about their religious faiths if they're all experiencing something similar religiously? What does that say about their particular religious dogmas? And could that potentially invite a conversation about something universal or at the core underlying these religions? That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, I think that's been overplayed in terms of any interpretation from the study. I mean, it's you have psilocybin that's occasioning all of these experiences. So, if you find similarities to the experiences, it doesn't the idea that necessarily points to a core similarity across religious faiths seems kind of a stretch. I mean, this is referred to as perennialism in the scholarship of religion, the idea that all of the religions are basically different flavors of the same core underlying inclinations or principles. Uh, and you can get theological with that God is expressing God's self in different ways to these different religions. But, it's psilocybin that's, I mean, from a skeptical point of view, it's psilocybin that's like prompting the experience for everyone. So, I mean, if you're, let's say, like, debating this with a religious person, well, they would say, well, first of all, like, how do you even know that this is a genuine religious experience? You know, by assuming there's a commonality to these experience of these people of different religions, and that has something to do with the nature of God or the nature of religion, they would come back with, well, you're completely assuming that this is a genuine religious or a God experience, but it's an experience that came about because you gave them psilocybin. I mean, to me, this is just in the world of complete, philosophy. People can have their opinions, but it really is just beyond what science can, address one way or the other, you know?
Right. Yeah. You're, for people in case you're not following, what you're saying is that this study does not prove something about the nature of reality. Just it can only prove just the nature of like subjective experience from person to person. We're delineating what these people are experiencing. Not We're not actually finding a proof of something about the metaphysics of reality.
Right, right. We don't, the one thing we know is that these are experiences that happened after psilocybin was given. And then any kind of interpretation after that, if that has any sort of relationship to, their, inherently about their religion or about the nature of God, is just completely up to, that's individual opinion. That's just kind of beyond science.
Yeah.
Um, uh, yeah, so it really can't, like, I've seen the study sort of described as kind of like testing whether the religions all come from a common source, but it's, there's no way in the world it could do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
even if it at multiple levels, like one, even if you had like 1,000 people from each religion, like 1,000 Christians and 1,000 rabbis and 1,000 imams and etc., um, you still couldn't it still couldn't address that point, but for the reasons that I said. Um, but the second point is that you've got 22 Christians and like five rabbis and like one Buddhist. It's like you have no, like, I mean, to say you have no statistical power to make any claims across these groups is an understatement. So you couldn't even make the claim if there was 1,000 in each group, and you certainly couldn't make the claim if there's like one or five or even 20 some in these particular
Yeah.
across these particular groups.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's go into the study findings. Um, so, Matt, should we just summarize the results, or is there anything else you want to say first?
No, we can go into the results.
Yeah. So this is from the study paper. So the primary outcome assessment at 6 months after screening showed that compared with the delayed control group, participants who had received psilocybin reported significantly greater positive changes in their religious practice, attitudes about their religion, and effectiveness as a religious leader, as well as in their non-religious attitudes, moods, and behavior. Um, Matt, do you want to summarize some of the interesting findings?
Yeah, so I mean, there were a number of categories. I mean, but generally, people said it was a positive experience for them. They found it very spiritual and of religious importance, and they generally said that it helped them in both life and in their religious practice. So, in broad strokes, just very similar to our earlier work in spiritually interested people. Um, you have a few kind of more particular things here because they are religious, there are clergy members, so you can ask them about, the effects on their professional role as a clergy member. And a lot of people said that there were, positive changes. Not all, but you know, um, so I don't know. I mean, maybe you can
Yeah. So at the
show
16
the
month
table, like
yeah
table three, if you
at
like.
6 one thing I want to highlight at 16 months follow up, most, which is 79% clergy members strongly endorsed that the experience had positive effects on their religious practices, like prayer or meditation, and their daily sense of the sacred. And most, which is 71%, reported positive changes in their appreciation of religious traditions other than their own,
Right.
which is
So
really
both of those are kind of interesting and generally consistent with, again, the work in healthy normals. I mean, it's not everybody. It's generally 2/3. Um, but that in and of itself is very interesting and impressive. Um,
let's put up some of these tables here to go into a little bit more depth. So this is table two.
mm-hmm.
So rating of spiritually significant experiences during the past 5 months. Um, changes in your contemplative prayer or meditation practices. So this is we're rating this out of 10.
Yeah, for
So
that first question, many of the subsequent questions, many of them were on a 5-point scale. But yeah, so um, the interpretation sort of depends on the which question you're talking about. But you can see um, in the column, the bolded categories on that second to last comment are noting the ones the items for which there were significantly higher ratings for the group that had received the psilocybin, the immediate group compared to the delayed group. So again, here the delayed group hasn't had any psilocybin yet.
yeah,
Um, and so basically everything that's bolded, there's a you know statistically it seems that we can reliably say, yeah, the group had received psilocybin was significantly higher on that rating.
yeah,
So, a higher percentage of people saying it was amongst the 5 most spiritually significant experiences of their lifetime. That it changed their contemplative prayer or meditative practices. Um, it changed their attitudes about spirituality and religion, um, their appreciation or understanding of their own religious tradition, and of other religious traditions, um, etc.
Yeah. Here it's feel more effective in their role as a religious leader. That was also significant, but so was
Mm-hmm.
feeling less effective in their role as a religious leader. I didn't see that coming.
Right. So, yeah, probably because you have, a whole lot of nothing in the delayed group. There's not much change. It's just a random 6 months that's passing. And amongst the psilocybin group, you get people reporting different things. Some people, saying, yeah, like it made me a better pastor or what have you, and other people saying, no, it's actually caused me some problems. And Yeah, I'd say that, now overall it appears that, I think kind of in totality, it looks like, the large majority of people found it positive, and that was their attribution, that it was positive, but it's not like there weren't any negatives. And so this kind of rate, or that general profile doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, it's kind of like what you see in, um, the therapeutic studies. I mean, the remarkable thing is that the large majority, it seems like it's really helping them. But then there's other people that it either doesn't do anything, or even in some cases, they'll say it made some things worse. I mean, it's a very powerful intervention, um, and it can kind of go both ways.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious what that even means. Feel less effective in role as religious leader. Like, is that to do with like the psychologically you feel less effective because of some challenging or painful experience from psychedelics, which can happen,
It could
or
be. I mean, ultimately,
yeah,
it's just. I mean, this is the actual. This is the wording that the participant sees and what they're rating. So it really just completely depends on how each individual interprets that question. So, like, yeah,
yeah,
the way you just express it, that could be. That seems like a reasonable guess. I mean, you could speculate a number of things. That, gosh, they felt kind of bewildered, and were kind of like their focus was on their own kind of their self. And so they were, and this happens with psychedelics, it can happen that they don't really have the resources to be focused on other people, or like, like someone could say, like, I didn't even
right,
know what was going on with me. I had to like really focus my time and figure out, like, what the heck has happened to me, good and bad, how to make sense of this. And it just a lot of time that's self-focused. So you can
right,
imagine, like, maybe there's some, oh, I didn't have the wherewithal to really put my attention on other people. That could be, and again, I'm
right.
speculating here, so,
Yeah, sure.
we didn't break it down, further than that. I mean, we got some like written analyses from various people, that, I don't know. There was a paper planned for that. I don't know if it's ever going to be published, but one with based on qualitative interviews with people, that
Yeah,
could speak to that potentially.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. I see what you're saying, and that it could be. We're obviously speculating here, but having these two very intense, possibly mystical experiences that one has never had anything like that before, maybe, or maybe they have, but um,
it
and
can
but
be
it's
disorienting. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
It's opened up these doors in your consciousness that you didn't know were there, or maybe you did know they were there and they were opened again. And the fact that a drug could even do that is kind of crazy. And what does that mean about yourself and your thoughts and your consciousness? And what does it mean about God and the nature of reality? Like, that can all prompt a very deep um, self inquiry about what the hell just happened. And so that could, in theory, make you less effective in
yeah.
spiritually leading other people.
Yeah.
This one is also interesting. Less passion for sharing your religious understanding slash faith. That was
Yeah.
substantially greater in the psilocybin group. Yeah, that's a negative or a positive depending on your perspective.
So let's see,
Obviously,
like less passion. So interestingly, that the higher numbers are in the delayed group. So the nature of that difference is
yeah.
that it's the delayed group that reported higher.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so the delayed group and we can only speculate, but these are also small. This is on a 5 point scale, and the average response was 0.56.
Okay,
So it was
gotcha.
statistically significant, but it was kind of a blip in terms of
Yeah,
I wouldn't make a whole lot out of it. Like there was a few people that gave a number above zero on for that particular question. I guess, who knows? Maybe they were frustrated doing this silly study and then they're randomized to wait for 6 months and you know, so then I don't know. I could only
yeah,
make up a story, like
yeah, yeah.
maybe that's just capturing. Maybe during that, had they never signed up for the study during that 6 months, maybe that's a progressive decline in their willingness to share their faith with others. And so we just captured like kind of and it could be that the psilocybin experience halted or prevented, attenuated that slight decline that we saw that would have otherwise have been seen over that 6 month period. It's hard to say,
Right.
but not a big effect. Again, the average rating was only a half a point on a 5 point scale.
Also, there was a significant difference in religious professionals feeling more certain about a positive role of religion in the world. So after the psilocybin sessions, they felt
Right.
more certainty that religion is a positive force in the world, which is
But
interesting.
interestingly, you saw that both groups, to a relatively similar degree, I mean, on average, in the delayed group, it was a little bit less than 2. And in the delayed group, it was a little less than 3, again, on a 5 point scale. So both groups are saying that compared to the beginning of the study, they were kind of more, on a moderate range of the scale, sort of in the middle. Um, they were more certain about the positive role of religion in the world, but that was somewhat higher, and it was statistically significantly higher in the psilocybin group.
Yeah, right. And to clarify, this is the delayed intervention control. This is people who haven't done the psychedelic sessions, and the immediate intervention. That's people right after the two sessions.
No, that's after their that's not right after the 2 sessions. That's about 6 months later.
6 months later, yeah. Whereas the delayed intervention control, they haven't done it yet.
Correct. Yeah.
And
It
is it
was
the
6 months after their kind of intake into the study.
and is it in both of these? Is it the same people, or are they different people in each group?
No, these are two different groups of people. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Um. Yeah, and increased. There was an increased tolerance for religious diversity among clergy member after the study, after the psilocybin
Yeah.
session.
But again, you also see, it's not that different, kind of like that last one. It's a little bit below 2 out of 5 points for the delayed group and a
Right.
little bit above 3 on the psilocybin group. But, it was reliably higher, but not higher by that much.
Right.
So you can only speculate why are the people in the delayed group, why are they now more tolerant of religious diversity?
Hmm.
I don't know. Maybe they've been reading more about psychedelics because they got into the study and their mind is already going into areas of exploring alternative paths of spirituality. I don't know.
Yeah. 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 And across the board, like positive attitudes about life. Um. That increased after the psilocybin session. Positive attitudes about self. Positive mood changes. all the psychological effects,
Mm-hmm.
altruistic positive social effects also went up after the psilocybin sessions. Positive behavior changes.
Although positive behavior changes, I don't think
Yeah,
was
yeah,
significant.
that actually says is not significant, although the number does go up, but
Right, not statistically so.
right.
So, both,
Okay.
36% in the delayed group, 54% in the psilocybin group. So,
Okay.
not a big difference.
Okay.
Which to me, it's, had I been, designing the study exclusively, myself, or had I been, in charge of the study, I would have really focused more on behavioral um,
Mm,
assessments. And that, that kind of lack of a difference is, I find kind of interesting. Kind of like this is in part why, given my history with all the spiritual research with psilocybin, which I'm very interested in, I really wanted to move it into something like addiction treatment, something like smoking cessation, where you have just straight up, like, whether, like, you test their breath and their urine samples, whether they've actually changed something about their life or not. It's just not their opinion,
right.
that, you're certain it's not just some post hoc rationalization. So, in the context of this study, what I'm kind of more interested in, or I would say what I'm most interested in, is, are you more of service? Are you, like, when your congregation member's husband had a heart attack, are you going to the hospital at 3 a.m. to sit up with the woman
Mm,
and pray with her? Like, that's like, to me, that's like,
hmm.
things like that. And that's going to be idiosyncratic. And so that's not as easy to study as, did you quit smoking or not? But the more kind of, detail that you get like that, the more interested I am. Because I'm kind of I've seen those positive effects that, religious leaders can have on people. And it's that type of, like, service that to me is the most, being with people during their most difficult times. Um, are you showing up for that? Or do you feel like that's a burden? Are you more likely to do it and you know, exhibit patience and kind of go above and beyond in terms of yeah, your personal time, which, of course, there's like, what's your personal time, what's your professional time? It's like, that's kind of the point with clergy. It's like that all of that is mixed up. This is supposed to be a service to God and their calling. And so, but as we know, they're just human beings, and so burnout is a real thing. So I'm kind of interested in those, like, burnout as a construct with psychedelics in general. And so, in what ways might this kind of help to to prevent or to reverse some aspects of behavioral burnout?
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense to me. That would have been really interesting to see, and I hope someone out there might want to fund a study like that in the future. That'd be really interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to run that study or be part of it. Yeah, especially
Right.
if we could, yeah, get to actual. And I'm even beyond that, just pro social. Like, can you more explicitly leverage this into actual, like, volunteering and spending to, like, as behavioral as you can get, so we can actually say, like, these people spent, I don't know, when they were given an opportunity, they spent more time, or, gave more of their money, or whatever metric you have, like, concrete stuff. Like, are you actually being more pro-social in the world? To me, that stuff is, like,
Yeah.
far more interesting than whether they considered it one of the top five. Again, not that it's not interesting, but
Right.
we can all tell ourselves these stories. Oh, that was such a profound experience. It's like, oh, that totally changed me. And it's like, okay, well, have you really
Right.
changed? Like,
I can see your very strong behavioral perspective on this. That's one of the strong aspects of behavioralism that you're describing.
Right. And I think for a lot
Yeah,
of people, like, an experience does change them, but probably objectively it's kind of nudged them a little bit. They're a little bit, but if it's just their subjective rating, they think, oh, it's night and day. But if you ask
yeah,
the people around them, or if you looked at some objective measure, it might be kind of more, smaller in magnitude. And I think those of us who have known people in kind of especially in the kind of the human potential, like New Age spirituality, movement in general, like, I don't know, there are those people that, like, every time they go to something, it's like you talk to them and it was, oh, that was the most profound experience of my life, but you've heard that from that same person like 30 times.
right, yeah,
There are those types, and,
yeah,
people differ,
yeah,
by that, on that dimension, whatever that is. And so that's what I always have in the back of my head, like, is, how can we really drill down to get as concrete as possible about whether this is kind of really making people better. And I think it
right,
is. I'm just, in many cases, I'm just very aware of the
yeah,
fluff that can surround.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like at the end of the day, it sort of matters most what impact it's actually having on a person's actions and behaviors and interactions with other people. Right? Has that actually been positively changed or not?
Yeah. And people might differ on that, but that's my inclination.
Yeah.
That's kind of more important than whatever your self assessment of how tolerant you are to other people's religion. Like what if we set up something, like a study, there was actually a study of this back, I forget when it was, might have been back in the 70s or 60s, where you can get away with this, but a psychological study of, I believe they were seminary students, actually, and this is really devious the way they set this up, on their way to deliver a sermon about the Good Samaritan. And for those who aren't familiar, the Good Samaritan is a biblical story, a New Testament story of the Samaritan was someone. This would be in today's equivalent, like an Israeli and Palestinian. Like, so this is like the hated ethnic group. Like the person's own sort of affiliated people, like, passed by and didn't help this poor guy that had been beat up on the side of the road, and it was like the least likely person ever of this, like, the enemy group, like, stopped and saved their life basically, and helped them get back to health. And so, like, there was a study where where they had these seminary students, like, going to deliver a good a good Samaritan sermon, and on the way they had a Confederate, like an actor, like, play someone that was like, and I forget the details, but like they were begging, like they had hurt themselves, and they studied, like, a lot of people just like blew past. They're literally on their way to deliver a good Samaritan sermon, and they just like blew past some dude that was like begging them for help on the street.
Ah, right.
So it's
Okay.
like, you know, um,
Wow. Like someone just injured or something.
something like that. Again, forgetting
Yeah.
the details, but
Yeah.
I'm kind of
Right.
interested. You may not get a study like that approved. It's kind of devious. I'm not sure whether it should, but you can do things like that. You can,
What can you do?
yeah, like you can, behavioral tests to see, like, literally how willing are people to share in a scenario where they don't think they're even being studied. Like,
Hmm.
you give them, there's tasks, like you give them like candy, and like how much are they willing to share with others. Like, I remember, like, one study where they, like, had some experimental game where just the people that, like, won more kind of like literal, like monopoly money in this game were more likely to hoard the candy that was being shared on the table. So sort of suggesting that, like, people, for whatever reason, even if it's blind luck, that get rich tend to kind of be greedier. and you could have your, theories about why that might be the case. You might, the world is kind of, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that I deserve everything that I've gotten in life, and so I must be great. And but you can do things like that, and I'm kind of more interested in that, to kind of,
Yeah.
because psychedelics are good at kind of like creating a narrative, and it's not like I don't believe in there's a lot of power and a lot of help that can be provided, but particularly with stuff like this, I'm kind of, like I was interested in the study moving in more of that direction, studying those types of outcomes, and at least getting more kind of details on their the behaviors in their clergyship, particularly when
Right.
it comes to like helping congregation members.
Yeah. Yeah. And you and I are both interested in this. I think it's called the critical window, the critical period of after psychedelics, after having a psychedelic experience, that
Yeah.
window of actually making changes in your life and altering your perceptions or your views on things, and actually the real tangible change.
Right. And so like, there's it looks like there's something like that. Like if we're extrapolating the animal evidence to humans and what we're seeing therapeutically in people, it's a credible story that the nervous system might be more plastic, more malleable, and that if you could establish new, healthier habits during and no one knows the length of time, but the days and weeks following the psychedelic effects, then you can kind of stamp those in to some degree.
Right. And yeah, so it doesn't last forever, that period. There's a limited time. Right.
Right, which is probably why in like psychedelic circles people talk about like, yeah, doing your homework rather than just like having your next psychedelic experience. It's like, what lessons did you get from that last experience, and what are you doing to actually make that a daily habit rather than just like kind of being hooked on the experience? Are you kind of paying attention to the positive effects you think you may have gotten?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's finish off with looking at some of the positive or interesting effects of the study. Anything you want to highlight here from table 3 you mentioned earlier, Matt?
Um No, I think we've sort of covered it. I mean, it's all general. There's probably it would just be speculative to get into each one of these categories. But, just generally people, on average said that there were lots of positive effects for their views on their religion, others' religions, their professional, their religious life, to themselves personally.
Yep. Yep. Um, and then anything from table 5, assessments of sacred experiences during psilocybin sessions.
Well, one thing that is a reminder that, again, it's like I wasn't at the helm of the study, but, one of the limitations is that I was able to get it into the discussion as a limitation of the study, but we just sort of like described the psilocybin experience. We referred to it as their sacred experience, like, which is just, we defined it as a sacred experience rather than letting the participants
Hmm.
make that designation. We should have just said your psilocybin session,
Right.
which like, so there was
Yeah.
a lot of sort of like trying to push it in a certain direction. Which you could argue, you could make an argument for that, but I think the more interesting study is where you set up the right conditions, but yet you're not at that level, like you're not defining whether it's sacred or not. Let them come to that conclusion.
Right. And then here you have rate the profound nature of the sacred experience compared with previous such experiences.
Right.
0% said that the percent rating no profound sacred experience.
Yeah. And here, this isn't comparing the two groups. This is comparing the people at, 4 months after the session compared to a year after that. Um, so all of this is in relationship to the psilocybin sessions, and it's just, how long after. And the general trend was those ratings didn't change much. which kind of speaks to whatever change, whatever attribution there was generally the same thing they said several months after session to like well over a year after the sessions. It was about the same.
So the 0% that I've highlighted, like this is income. This is um this is the percentage of
Yeah, no
individual.
one said it wasn't profound at all.
Right.
In other words, everyone thought it had at least some level of profoundness.
Right.
Profundity, I guess, would be the word.
Yeah. 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 Um. No, this is interesting. Rate the degree to which you believe that your sacred experience showed you something absolutely true and was not just an illusion. So 100% rated this strong or absolutely true.
Yeah, and then that's interesting. So like, one or two people, I'm not sure, I'm not quick on the math, but out of those folks, it went down from 100 to 91.7. So one or two people backed off a little bit, a little bit, not a big difference, but uh, they backed off a year later in that assessment.
Yeah.
But still, like the most notable thing is that, yeah, and you could, I mean, that could cut both ways. You could say, well, if ground truth is that there are these religious truths that like whatever they're talking about, then they're more sensitive and open to that. And on a more skeptical side, there's evidence that psychedelics make people more suggestible, and you can kind of leverage them to having an overconfidence. And there's some cognitive data consistent with this. Like people tend to be overconfident. Well, more confident, I should say, whether they're overconfident or not is kind of more of a personal judgment, especially when something like a religious question where like, ground truth is anyone's opinion scientifically, but is it a good or a bad thing that they're kind of more confident in an absolute truth?
Yes. Yeah. And 83.3% of religious clergy members had some sacred experiences, including an authoritative, utterly convincing experience of unity. 83% rated that as strong or extreme after
Mm-hmm.
after 4 months. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, that's one of the aspects of a mystical experience, is having a sense of unity,
Hmm.
such as it felt like someone is one with all of creation, for example, one with the
Yeah.
universe, one with all of humanity, one with
Yeah. Yeah.
God. All of
I'm,
that could be considered in the concept of unity.
I'm glad you're elaborating because some people are like, "What the hell does that mean?"
Yeah,
So,
yeah, especially with the psychology of religion, you can get into these like
yeah.
even the word mystical. It's like, well, that kind of just means kind of like dream catchers and crystal balls. And it's like, it has like actually specific meaning. An
Yeah.
experience with a sense of unity, sense of timelessness and spacelessness, sense of paradoxicality, ineffability, and an overall positive mood. So that together, those kind of constitute a mystical experience, whatever the source of that experience is.
Mm. Those are the
Whether it
five. Those are the five elements.
it, it the number of elements range from like 4 to 7, depending on which
Uh huh.
scale you use and which. But those are the biggies.
Mm. Timelessness, ineffability, spaciousness, unity.
Yeah, sometimes it's broken up into internal and external unity, and
Hmm.
yeah, and sometimes paradoxicality and ineffability can be considered the same category or two separate
Hmm.
categories.
Hmm. That's so interesting that you've looked at this as a behavioral scientist. You've had to go into this aspects of mystical experience. That's so fascinating.
Yeah, well, I think it's the best background to be interested in these things. I think the mistake is to kind of like dismiss an area because it seems like it doesn't lend itself to behavior analysis, and I think it's just the opposite. It's like, no, that's an area actually most at need of a behavioral
Mm.
analysis. There's nothing wrong with studying verbal behavior, what people say about their behavior. You just got to keep in mind it's verbal behavior. It may or may not be pointing towards, some ground truth.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes what people say is like not the, sometimes it's the opposite of what, but oftentimes it is a good indication of what's happening behaviorally. You just have
Yeah.
to be aware of all of that.
Yeah. Here I will say that this is interesting to me that 80% of individuals after 16 months rated the degree to which they believe that their sacred experience has enriched their contemplative prayer or meditation practices as being strong or extremely enriched.
Mm-hmm.
80% at 16 months and about 67% at 4 months. Like that's not immediately obvious to me because I've heard of a wide range of psilocybin experiences. Some more disorienting and confusing, or potentially traumatic and just bad in a lot of different ways. Versus spiritually uplifting, changing their view of God or of ultimate reality, etc. It's interesting that the majority of them were more in the positive category.
Yeah. Yeah. And this was a highly supported and prepared, so as many elements as possible to drive it towards a positive outcome, and to reassure them if they had trouble during the session and all of that. But yeah,
Right.
I mean, you could speculate, like the experience with psilocybin might kind of give them more of a taste or an appreciation for um, subjective experience itself, so that one can sit in
Mm,
contemplative prayer. I always have trouble with that word, or meditation, um, and have kind of some interest in it. Like,
mm,
close your eyes and kind of absorb into the oneness of life. And,
mm.
before one might be like, yeah, I can kind of think about some things, but pretty much close my eyes and it's dark. And
Right.
and
Yeah.
after, and I remember
Yeah.
some participants in studies like saying like, what do you mean, like I close my eyes I see black, what do you mean, like, and but after the experience it might be like, no, there's a whole inner world going on within me, and just the felt presence of what it is to exist. And one could argue the psychedelics can give someone more of an appreciation for those things. Like, you might just think the backdrop is nothing is happening, but like an alternative is like, no, there's the whole felt presence of being alive, um, and existing, and depending on one's religious orientation, that could, you know, um, you can go as far out there as you want, but this idea that like maybe it's kind of increased their sensitivity to what they might feel as the presence of God, or the the peace and calm that can come when one kind of sits still and reflects, and kind of quiets their discursive mind.
Yeah. 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 This all makes sense to me, and I've thought a lot about it. W- we could spend an hour talking about each of these dimensions of mystical
Yeah.
experience and
And
how.
I've got about 20 minutes left before I have to break.
Okay.
So just as a calibration.
Yeah. Um, yeah. There's also this measure here of unconditional love experiences during psilocybin sessions. That's interesting. I didn't know this was actually looked at. Um,
Yeah.
66.7% of individuals at the 16-month follow-up said that the duration of experience was longer. The duration of experience of unconditional love was longer than any previous experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting because not everyone experiences unconditional love on psilocybin. Some people, have more negative or confusing, or just love is not in the experience, but the
Right.
majority here, slight
And
majority.
again, it's, we do have to keep in mind the framing. I mean, this was very much framed as a religious sacred experience, that,
Yeah,
the presence of God was something that was explicitly kind of made the focus,
yeah,
for better or worse. And so, it's not necessarily the same you're going to get out of any use of psilocybin, even in prepared conditions. I mean, one might be in a safe environment and supported by a friend and what have you, or a therapist, but without this kind of explicit focus on the religious and spiritual and God explicitly, then you could speculate that could certainly have had an effect in sort of increasing that, like feeling God's love.
Yeah.
And then we're in the pure realm of philosophy in terms of, well, was that really an experience of God's love, or did we just convince people under this this intense experience that makes people highly suggestible that it was God's love that they felt? Like, as a scientist, you just have to be silent on that. That's a
Yeah.
philosophical question.
Yeah, and last thing before we go on to some of the issues that you want to highlight about the study, some of the concerns that you had. Most 71% of clergy members, again, Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, reported positive changes in their appreciation of religious traditions other than their own. Um, that's interesting that would be the effect. It's not immediately obvious to someone from just a surface level perspective why having a psychedelic experience would do that for you, because not all psychedelic experiences are religious or spiritual in nature. But
Yeah. But one, caveat there is, this is again something that I really had to press for it to be in the paper. It was literally in a room with religious symbols from multiple faiths. And there was this kind of explicit backdrop of perennialism of, this is a way to, access the divine regardless of religious orientation, sort of this idea that, these are all just different paths. And so, it's very possible that those types of increases are influenced by this kind of overall orientation of the study, the multiple religious symbols. And it would be very easy to, like, let's say this was a study only with Catholics, and you had a statue of, a crucifix and the Virgin Mary and, whatever, Catholic symbols present. And there was no mention of other, and it wasn't in a study where we were recruiting Muslims, etc., and Jews, and it was, whatever. There was no mention of these other religions. I'm speculating, but it may be that in a study like that, you just saw an increased appreciation for Catholicism and not this increase in other religions. So we just got to be cautious in terms of what we kind of declare sort of an inherent property of a psychedelic experience versus what have we magnified from the context.
right, yeah, and
And the other thing is, just quickly, like, ground truth. I mean, we could have our opinions. I mean, I generally think it's good to be more tolerant in general, but some people wouldn't. I mean, some, more
yeah,
evangelical Christians, or and not just Christians. I shouldn't like
yeah, Muslims,
dog the
yeah,
Christian, but like people of all of these faiths, there are going to be some that say, no, that other thing is a false religion. And if you're
yeah,
now more open to seeing value in that, like, that's the devil's work, or or
yeah,
that's an
yeah,
illusion minimally. And like, no, it's
yeah,
like, that's not a good thing. And so again, that's something that just scientifically, you know,
yeah,
one is silent on. Again, I fall on the side of just no matter what, the domain generally tolerance makes for a better world. But there are people that would disagree with me and say, no, like, these
right,
people are pointed towards the wrong path. They're like, they may not, whatever, their eternity in the afterlife might now
right.
be called into question.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and you mean, to be clear, we don't have to talk about this too much, but like tolerance of religions that promote pro-social behaviors and collaboration and
Yeah,
love and peace, not, you and I,
like a live and let live.
yeah,
Like, hey, there's nothing wrong with
yeah, like you and I would not
being
have
Muslim, being you name it, being
yeah, but like you and I
But
would,
from a religious perspective, if someone's a more fundamentalist, like, let's say if they're a Christian, they were like, no, like, they're not going to heaven, and they, like, if they, if that's their perspective, again, that's a cat, that's, if that is their perspective, then, like, yeah, they should not want that person to be of that other faith. Like, they literally are saying, you're going to burn forever, and I don't want that from you. And again,
Yeah.
I just want to be clear. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
arguing what I'm just saying. Put yourselves in that person. If that is the belief system, then it's not like, oh, they're being a good person by being more tolerant, saying, oh, these are all just different paths. Like, if they believe that framework, a good person would say, no, 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 you need to pick the right path, because I don't like, I want
Right.
you to like
Yeah.
live forever and
Yeah.
not be
Sure.
tormented, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I've had many conversations with conservative Christians in my circles who are concerned about my lack of acceptance or of Christ as my savior, and the afterlife that is now different for me now because I'm not doing that, or whatever. I was just about to say though before that tolerance is not infinite. As a side point, like you and I would not have tolerance for say radical Islam or like hyper conservative, you know, certain distortions potentially of Christianity of being very anti-homosexual, like things like that. Like it's like generally tolerance of other people who are sort of in line with us. We're not tolerant for ISIS or Boko
yeah,
Haram or
yeah, I'm
whatever. Yeah,
not
right.
tolerant of intolerance.
Yeah,
you
right.
know, like
Yeah,
like yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, and we can come up with examples to be in all of these
yeah,
religions of extremists that are intolerant, or at the most extreme, think violence is a way to you know whatever exercise their religious faith, and
yeah,
yeah, like so, and yeah, I don't know, life is a balance of unlimited empathy isn't the right, I don't know,
yeah.
it's not the right thing to invite every homeless person into your house to sleep in the bedroom with your kids. I mean,
Right.
say like life is, infinite compassion isn't like the only principle that, yeah,
Yeah.
that one should be guided by. Like this is where wisdom and, like, yeah, comes into play.
Yeah, yeah, it's always Peterson talks about this. It's always having the balance, right? Like the dark side of or the extreme side of conservatism could be not being as understanding to those who are suffering and have been dealt a bad hand of cards. But the dark side of progressivism or liberalism could be this the overly compassionate, hyper tolerance, but in actuality, you're just supporting intolerance, like more radical
Right. I
factions
mean,
of
we can
certain
look no
religious
further
groups.
than
Yeah.
communism to see the example on that side of things that, like, yeah, you know,
Yeah, yeah, or some of the ghettoized, quote unquote, no go zones in Europe of people that have been just sort of let in without very little, with very
right.
little vetting.
Places where rabbis can be openly attacked because, and then even in some cases blamed, like where you're provoking it by showing up dressed like that in this part of town.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like what happened to like a tolerant, society?
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Europe is really struggling with this what's been this unfettered mass migration, and bringing certain groups of people in who have values that are incompatible with the West. So views on free speech or homosexuality, women's rights, etc. That's a major crisis.
right. Right. Are women allowed to wear mini skirts? Like,
Right.
yeah, like this is,
Yeah, but not, but
yeah, it's
people,
like that's up to
yeah,
them,
but
like,
not everyone in the Middle East or Africa would agree with that, or Asia.
right,
Yeah, people of other countries that would disagree with that.
right.
I appreciate how you and I can also have some of these deeper political or
Yeah.
sociological conversations. Not everyone can. So I appreciate your well-roundedness. Okay, so now we want to get to, before we go, really important, some of the concerns about the study that you've been very open about. So I'll kind of want to give you the floor on that, but some of the concerns are on ethical oversight and non-compliance. So the IRB, the Institutional Review Board at Johns Hopkins, found multiple counts of serious non-compliance with federally mandated human subjects protections in the study. There's also the conflicts of interest and funding involvement. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah,
And a
please,
lot
please.
of well, and really this kind of whole ball of wax was prompted, you know, not by me, but it was Joe Welker's pieces that he published that called into question some of the stuff that was the backdrop of the study and how it was being conducted, and that prompted and I found out about this all after the fact. I mean, I was aware of his pieces, but I found out that there was an investigation that was open that then had supposedly closed, and I still don't know the truth because they're just they won't even tell you about the presence of an investigation or not. And so I was told, secondhand that this investigation had closed. And I thought, similar to experience I've had at Johns Hopkins, like that's kind of odd because I was the other like faculty member at Johns Hopkins on the study, and that how could there be an investigation and I wasn't interviewed with anyone about this? That doesn't sound credible at all. And there was at least a subset of things that he had focused on that I said, yeah, there's some truth here. And so I felt that, it was important, especially it was really the context of this idea that an investigation had been started and then closed that to me looked like a sham, in that like I hadn't even been asked about anything. And so, I reached out about the subset of things that I had personal experience with, and that issues were in the study. But there's just, there's going to be so much that it's impossible to fully unpack. I would say the most egregious ethical problems were ones that the PI of the study found himself in the story. I still to this day have all of this like secondhand, because there was just like no transparency surrounding any of this. There was supposedly an internal audit of the study that he conducted because of Joe Welker's piece, because he anticipated that he was going to be audited, and he wanted to self-disclose any problems before they were found by another entity. And I still, despite asking the IRB, again, as a study team member, I've never been privy to that internal audit. And I know multiple people that were like, this was sent to, and then they were supposedly sworn to secrecy. Like, this is not the way that these things should be done. Like, the study team members should have been aware. But apparently that internal audit and providing it to, and that was like, this goes so deep, that was sent to the department chair to get some sort of sign off on it, not to the right authority, not to the IRB, but to the department chair. And then the department chair saying, oh yeah, this looks great. To try to then allow that to the academic journal to publish the study. And their take then was like, no, who cares what your chair says? Like, this is an IRB issue. Does the compliance department at your IRB, what do they have to say about these issues? So the whole thing just like, oh gosh, it looked like this big, just, I don't know, like circling the wagons, just like this is what wasn't about like just, okay, what was done right, what was done wrong, what needs to be done, what's the truth. It's more about like protection. And so, but the things that were revealed by this internal audit was that, and I certainly don't think this was a mistake. I think this was well known, but became clear that this had to have been disclosed because it was going to be disclosed soon enough. But it was revealed that not only did multiple funders work on the study, but one of those funders wasn't even listed on, who was actually guiding sessions, wasn't even on the study protocol, which is just a serious violation. And then like study data was given to one of the study funders who was operating as a team member, who then sent the data to a third party to do transcriptions, none of which had the appropriate IRB required, human subjects protections and permissions, and the training to deal with data and how to protect people's privacy and all of this. And so there was just, and the study team member who was acting as a therapist or a guide had applied. And this is why earlier I said it was an issue that this was like designed as a multi-site study at NYU and Hopkins. The IRB ultimately didn't weigh on those issues because they were focused on human subjects protections, but this was an issue because that person had applied to NYU to be a study therapist, and then the PI at NYU did the right thing and checked it out with the IRB, and they said, no, what are you kidding? You can't have this. And so, he did the right thing. Well, that person then came to to the PI at Hopkins, and the PI at Hopkins apparently said, sure, you can be a study therapist here. And unbeknownst to me at the time, like, I knew that decision was made. I wasn't in charge of things. And I didn't think it was the right decision. But the layer that I didn't know is that he apparently didn't even include her on the study protocol, I guess, in order to avoid, any, things being discovered about this kind of, like funders acting as study team members, and stuff like this had gone on before, like hiring former participants and study funders, like, research assistants being booted out of their office to make kind of like an office for study funders who come in like once a month and might spend an hour there. And just, there were all kinds of like grumblings over staff about how this wasn't right. But there was a sort of an environment, and to be clear, like, it wasn't the study funders' fault at all. Like, they're not charged with knowing these rules. It's not, they're not academics. It's on the person in charge, the PI of the study, to vet everything out and to tell them what the rules are, and to, assume that they've been appropriately listed on the protocol and all of this. So I don't think they did anything, I think from their perspective was like, oh, well, NYU said I couldn't do it, but Hopkins said I could. So sounds good, so those were the biggest things that I mentioned. But then there were this other things that there was this, like, in the earliest version of the manuscript, I really had to push for just like, we need to be honest with people that, the original wording was, this is a non-religious setting, in contrast to the Good Friday study. And that's, well, you can't say it's a non-religious setting. We have multiple religious, statues in the room. Like, we just need to describe it for what it is. It was a university session room that was, it's not unlike the Good Friday study. It wasn't done at a church, but it was at a room with religious symbols in it. And there was pushback to even including the fact that there were religious symbols. And there had been kind of disagreements over this before. I had published a commentary about, I don't think we should be conducting the therapeutic sessions with, religious symbols in the room. I think people should be welcome to bring or to have whatever religious symbol they want if they want it. But I don't think we should just be introducing that because, for any number of reasons. Someone who's of, let's say they're a Muslim, like, they might think if they see the Buddha there, they might say, this is a false god. Like, this treatment isn't for me. And, we could have our opinions about tolerance, but hey, if you're treating a woman dealing with breast cancer and you think this can help her, like, let's just, like, whatever, that's not a battle. Like, if it's a more fundamentalist Christian or like whatever religion, or an atheist that says, I think all of this is a bunch of nonsense. This isn't for me. This is some hippy dippy spiritual thing, religious thing. And, I've seen atheists go through these studies that are profoundly helped. And so, there was already this backdrop of me saying, at least for the therapeutic studies, like, let's not have this in there. And in terms of our shared space for the studies I was overseeing, like taking out the symbols, the religious icons, and then returning them to the room for the other sessions. So, but there wasn't even a willingness to admit that in the paper, with this sort of, with the argument of, oh, come on, it doesn't make a difference. Well, okay, if it doesn't make a difference, then why not include it? It just,
Yeah.
it takes like 5 words,
Yeah.
I don't know, but and some of the concern that Joe Welker's piece was that there was this like explicit kind of push, like interpreting, like guides directly interpreting the experience as, oh, we call that the Holy Spirit, things like this, like,
Really? They explicitly said
that was in Joe Welker's piece. And so, and I think that was kind of one of the main things that he focused on and had concerns about, like, why are these scientists making these religious interpretations for people? it's one thing if the participant says, I think I felt the Holy Spirit move through me, or if they're convinced like the Holy Spirit moved through me, but it's quite another for the
Yeah.
guide to say, well, that was the Holy Spirit moving through you. And,
Right.
but that's consistent with just this overall backdrop of perennialism. And these are all different pathways towards the divine as represented by the different symbols. And my take was ultimately for this study, it's like, okay, just, you could set up your study that way, but we just need to be radically transparent about what we did, like, and then readers can take that into account. But there's this kind of like effort to push the science in as much of a certain direction as possible. Also exemplified by just defining by fiat these are, please rate your sacred experience. Like, why are we calling it a sacred experience? It was the
Yeah.
psilocybin experience, and they're totally welcome to interpret it as sacred, and that should be a question. But like, why are we defining it as sacred? So there's all these kind of ways to kind of like appear that we're doing rigorous kind of objective science, but we're pushing it in a certain direction. And I thought ultimately when it comes to the study, it's like there's no perfect study, but like, and why I'm an author on the ultimate study. One, it was easier once other authors took over as like the lead authors of this thing after the unfortunate passing. So it was a little easier to kind of get some of these nuances in there. And there was a complete openness to like, along these lines, like, no, we want to describe exactly what was done. Like, there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with putting in, there were religious symbols in the room. It is what it is. People can think of that what they will. And then putting in certain limitations, like, oh yeah, like these religious leaders being willing to do the study are probably not representative of the general population of religious leaders in the U.S. It doesn't, I think these are, scientifically, legitimate findings to report, but we just have to be honest about the context in which the study was run.
Right.
So that generally like wraps it
Yeah.
up, that kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
And there were two individuals who participated in the study whose involvement was not reviewed or approved by the IRB.
Right. Those were the two funders that I mentioned.
And the two
And I don't
funders.
want to get into, I mean, it's unimportant who they actually were. And again, like, I don't
Yeah.
consider it their
It's not
problem
really
at
their fault.
all.
Yeah.
It wasn't their fault at all.
Right.
And the other team members like myself, they didn't know about a lot. I mean, we knew that they were involved, but we certainly didn't know that people hadn't done the appropriate training to get to be for data to be shared with them. And we didn't know that like one of them wasn't even listed as a study team member on the protocol.
Yeah.
I mean, that could have been theoretically found out, but frankly, there's with all of the research assistants and everything, you end up with this list of like multi-page, like 20 plus person list. And I get, no one, I didn't go through and just to, cross-reference, like, is everyone on the protocol, like, but, that's where like the PI is responsible for, you know, inputting that information and making sure it's accurate. And so like other people like myself who were on the study weren't aware that of these things that were found to be violations.
Yeah. And also, there was one case of a boundary violation allegation by one clergy member, who Reverend Hunt Priest. According to the priest, his guide, Dr. William Richards, allegedly touched him in a spiritually framed manner that crossed ethical boundaries. Welker
So I think
characterized.
that was according to Joe's piece, but then I think that individual himself came out that said that didn't happen. And so
Okay.
I don't know as much about that and about
Okay.
what
Yeah.
happened with that.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
the claim that was in the piece, again, that I think is disputed, and I don't know what the truth is, but that it was the person being touched on the chest. So, a man touching another man on the chest. So, I mean, just to be clear, I don't think there was any claim that there was anything sexual
Yeah. Yeah.
about the encounter. Um,
Yeah. Um, and other than that, just there was some backlash about the participant group being predominantly white, male, and Christian. We touched on
yeah,
that a
I
little
mean,
bit
I don't
earlier.
think a backlash. I mean, that's unfortunately a limitation of, or at least the white part, is despite our best efforts, like that's
Yeah.
almost every psychedelic study is 80-90% white, probably because of higher rates of interest in psychedelics amongst white people. It's something to do our best at and improve on. And my colleague, Peter Hendricks, in a study I'm a part of, is about to publish a clinical trial where there's majority black participants, which is going to be really great to see published. But yeah, that, I mean, that's a limitation, but I wouldn't say there was a particularly strong, however you stated it. It wasn't like there was an upheaval over it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
This is just,
so the new thing here is, given the religious focus, it was like, yeah, it was mostly Christian. That would have been nicer to have. It would have been better to have more representation from other religions, but it was kind of a recruitment. Had we let the study run for 20 years, we might have gotten like,
yeah.
5 Hindus and, like, et cetera. But,
Right. And
and I
and
think as
yours,
far as stuff like that, you do your best and you just report it as a limitation.
yeah. And as
You
far as you
know,
mentioned the racial diversity thing, like that's is that important to you because of potentially like anything like genetically like
so it's just
relevant
important
or
that. So let's see, it's far less likely. I mean, there are some, like, basic, like, I don't know, like, genetic differences, like, um, like the polymorphism that codes for alcohol dehydrogenase in Asian populations, where you can get the flushing, or sickle cell anemia in African descendant populations. There are some things where there's, like, this very good reason and a known mechanism to suspect racial differences. There's nothing that anyone is aware of where you would expect that difference in terms of response to psilocybin. Anything would be in the category of just kind of subcultures, and you know uh, that and but you just just in general, research comes from a history of under inclusion of women and minorities, and then even worse, like specific inclusion for really dangerous stuff and harmful stuff in minorities, like this Tuskegee experiment, and certainly the atrocities the Nazis committed. So, and not just Nazis, but not just Tuskegee, but multiple things that have gone on in the United States in our past. So, just it's important to have racial and other diversity, sex, men and women, and racial diversity, just for general principles. At the same time, you also don't want, like, it's not good for science to let this study run on for 20 years to get the perfect sample. You know what I mean? You do your best, and you
yeah.
try to be creative and try to have ways to kind of to 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 improve upon that.
Would you say like a goal is to be like representative of the population? Is that
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a reasonable way to put it. Like, that's a good. Yeah, you want to represent, in this case, I would say, the U.S. population of religious leaders, and to some degree, like, I don't know exactly what the racial distribution of specifically religious leaders, but we probably still overrepresented white people in that sense. But it's something that you don't want to stop science, because you don't have the perfectly representative sample, you know. Um, and on the other hand, you don't want to just to be not a big deal at all. Like, oh, who cares? You know, like if you ran a study with like 600 people and like 100% of them are white, like what's going on? Like the only way you could do that is if you were explicitly not including, you know, but you know, you're doing a study with like 29 people and, you know, like it's a little harder, you know, like you get as much diversity as you can, which we did. And yeah, and if that ends up being 80, I forget what it was, something like that, 80 to 90%, um, you continually do your best to have a
Yeah.
more diverse sample.
Yeah. And one other thing that ChatGPT highlighted for me, it said that the results were only recently published, which we talked about a little bit earlier, and only one of two planned papers was released, and the second remains unpublished, raising concerns about selective reporting or possible suppression of findings.
So I think that's that qualitative analysis based on
Okay.
data that were, yeah, the funder that wasn't supposed to be a study team member and the data were given without like, so I suspect that's never going to see the light of
Okay.
day, which is really unfortunate. And I should say a big reason for the delay that hasn't been like the PI was sat on the paper for like 2 years or something, like well before this, like the investigation. So that was the biggest thing. Just you know, like we've all done it in science. Like you just have a just giant list of things, and like it just didn't get the priority. And a lot of times you get this too with like very senior authors that want to be first author or lead on everything instead of just handing it off to someone else like a junior colleague to write it up. They want to author it themselves even though it's going to take like another year for them to get to it. So that's in reality that's like a big part of what caused the delay.
Mm. And your view on last thing on Roland Griffiths's involvement in all this?
Well, I mean, he was the PI that I was referring to.
Yeah.
Like, so he was the PI. So, I mean, I don't want to make, I'm sorry that he passed away, and I don't want, and that happened. I think this whole thing was, and the investigation was ongoing before he passed away, and so it really, the paper coming, it was kind of a like the timing was coincidental. In terms of how everything went down. But, you know, I mean, I'd rather make it as impersonal as, that's why I've just referred to the PI, like it is what it is. The PI of the study made these decisions and did these things, and that person is no longer with us. So, I mean, that there would have been consequences uh, by the IRB, but I mean, that's what happens when,
Yeah.
the person's no longer with us. There's no one really to blame. That's remains with us. So,
Mm. Do you know why he held on to the study for 2 years and didn't publish it?
like, I mean, I already described that in terms of just like not wanting someone else to write it up.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
just being
And
really busy. I mean, and that's where you got to make a call, like when you're leading a lab, to, I mean, one, share authorship opportunities because there's like people vying for first author status, and you've got to like, especially when it comes to like holding on to something like, oh, I want to write this up, but it's going to take me, like 2 years to get to it. Like, no, you want to like, you know, not be greedy.
right. Yeah. But my impression was when he was on Peterson's podcast that he was eager to release this.
No, that that study had been finished for a long time. I mean, I know I was making the randomizations, like that study
Yeah.
had been done.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you feel like Roland had a very strong bias to amplify positive findings or.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm, right. Yeah. And you mentioned like your objections to like calling it a sacred experience and the religious icons in the room, things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Right. Okay. Um, yeah. Any last just kind of overall thoughts about the study? Like it sounds like there were some interesting aspects of the study, but you think it could have been done way better, and there were some
Yeah,
of these
and I think what
concerns.
we ended up with, and it's the reason I was an author. I think we have a good description of what was done. Something I hadn't mentioned yet is that, like me and the other authors, wanted to be even more fully, like we wanted to give more of the quotes of what the IRB concluded, and they prohibited us from doing it in the paper itself. Like we wanted to be completely transparent, and they said no, this is the only language you can use, and like, which was just astonishing to me. But nonetheless, like still it was reasonably transparent, and the study was described the way it was conducted. And we got in there the fact that we called it a sacred experience and all of this, and the religious symbols in the room. And so I think it's like there's scientific value to the data, and I'm glad it's finally out there.
And also one other thing, I was hearing from the grapevine, maybe last year or at some point that when Roland had gotten his terminal diagnosis, months and weeks before he passed away, he was potentially trying really hard to get the study published. I don't know if that's verified, or if that's
Yeah,
accurate
putting
at
a lot
all.
of pressure for easy reviews and this type of thing. It's Yeah.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate because he's such a otherwise respected scientist, but doing that at the end of his career, it's just
Right, and kind
really
of leveraging the illness as a, you know, you know, like it's critical that this, comes out while I'm still here, and you know,
yeah. But
um,
he was pushing for an easier review. You're saying,
yeah. So it would be
Hmm.
quick for that reason.
Right? And did
Yeah.
the who would be the ones reviewing it? The journal,
Well, yeah, the journal review. It's a peer review, so it's anonymous.
right? And I assume they didn't provide that easy, quick review.
No, I don't think so. No,
Yeah,
no.
yeah. Yeah, well, again, that's it's unfortunate
Yep.
because Roland has done so much compelling, incredible work over the years,
Yep.
and that
I'm gonna
that
have
last
to run now. Actually,
sounds good.
a heart out.
Sounds good.
Great to chat about it with you.
Yeah. I enjoyed this conversation. So thanks for coming on.
Okay, my pleasure.
Hi, everyone. A quick shout out to our sponsor, David Roth. I met David in Denver, Colorado earlier this year for the Psychedelic Science Conference hosted by MAPS. And David and I deeply connected about men's mental health, plant medicine, consciousness, meditation, and helping solve the loneliness, trauma, isolation, social media addiction crisis that my generation, Gen Z, faces. And I'm going to be doing a number of podcasts on some of these topics, from relationships and dating to psychedelics and trauma. David has kindly sponsored this episode and a previous episode with Aubrey Marcus, and we greatly thank David for his support, and just wanted to acknowledge that. All right, thank you.